And this moves us on to arguments. So first speakers should always try and run the most intuitive case that first comes to mind, because oftentimes your second speaker have more time to figure out extension or just adapting to the round. So sometimes in prep, your second speaker doesn't have an argument. Maybe a lot of it is just backing up the first speaker, and therefore the first speaker, as a result, will also have to be the most analytically rigorous in developing the argument, for the reason that they are the ones that can not only run the most intuitive argument, but it's also where the most intuitive argument has the most amount of depth, because you can prove this either via your impact or whatever. So oftentimes your intuitive argument also has the most amount of potential to be explored through a diversity of different angles and different stakeholders, which is why your arguments are super important in this instance. The next thing that I'll talk about here is then on your structure. So I would just say that structures can differ from speaker to speaker, but especially if you're starting out, most speakers, and even when you are like when you get a lot better, most speakers often do follow a safe and a very rigid structure in their speeches. So this can be the problem solution model. So what is the problem? Why is this problem true? Why is this harmful? And then you explain it, so whether or not you have a solution or a policy that is able to solve those problems. I think that works also. But you also have the incentive and the capacity model. So explaining as to why there's an incentive for an actor to do this well, explains whether or not they have the financial or the political capacity for them to be able to execute this policy in ways that are beneficial also. The last one is the impact intensive model. So this one is where maybe it's very easy for you to like mechanize it out. So maybe this is an argument that requires one or two mechanization. So a lot of it is focused on trying to impact the case as much as you can. So for instance, in the idea about this house will ban smoking, I think it's intuitive for you to argue that when you ban smoking, there are less smokers and there's therefore less demand for cigarettes, maybe. And then, so it's very easy to prove that you get a particular end outcome. Then the rest of the speech should just be devoted to you trying to impact the end outcome. That explains why smoking is really bad. Explains why when people no longer smoke, they have more incentive to want to find rehabilitation. There's demand for rehabilitation, but it's a lot better. So again, for the final one, if the argument is one that has a very easy and like end outcome, like you don't need a lot of you don't need a lot of mechanism, you don't need a lot of layers a lot of layers of analysis. If this end outcome is one that is very easy to prove, then maybe the impact intensive model would be helpful in that particular instance. So your structure may differ, but it's also just very important that the things that you say sticks to the round. So try to trim the excess fat of the case, right? So if you're very unnecessary framing of like definition, if you're a very unintuitive mechanism that just doesn't pass the vibe check or just doesn't sound plausible, even if you try to make it sound plausible, you can try to disregard those things. But this can also be things like fake weighing. So if your weighing is like, well, we win on scale and we win on magnitude and vulnerability words, I think it's also just very important for you to just, like do this like what is it? To just do this in ways that are like strategic. So don't like when you're weighing, for instance, explain as to why you are able to weigh it in terms of things like, vulnerability, but also explain as to why this is the most vulnerable actor. When you're explaining on scale, explain so why it is on scale and all these different things also. Yeah. So the next thing that you can focus on are examples of this. So for example, like this how supports the remilitarization of Japan. Explain as to how does the remilitarization process look like. Whether or not this is like whether or not this is decoupling away from like US manufacturing, like or supplying like military weapons towards Japan, but this can also just be Japan establishing the JSDF, the Japanese Self-Defense Force, and like amending the key article within the constitution that allows for things like self-defense or like collective defense. This one is, I think, was like touted by both like I think Sanae Takaichi also when she talked about the whole Taiwan thing. This house figures the dominant narratives that individuals are meant for greater things. Some of this you can just explain also as to why, individuals, why this narrative exists. Absent this narrative, what are the other narratives that exist? So in this particular one, why are there so many typos? But in this particular one, you can also explain so why absent this particular narrative, what is the likely incentive that will have occurred. So another important thing to note in framing is that sometimes different motions also require very different framing. So in this house regards motion, for example, the more strategic framing will also just be framing out what is the counterfactual and why is that the likely counterfactual. In a motion about like an actor, for example, it will also just be very strategic for you to not only outline how does the actor look like right now, what are they struggling with, but also what are their main interests, what do they want, and what are their like long-term, short-term desires. So again, different motions often have different like um things that you need to frame that are very, very important. So in this house regards, there's a premium that's placed on you flashing the counterfactual. In actor motion or in the interest of X motion, there's a premium that's placed upon outlining and fleshing out the incentive of the interest of the actor. But in this house supports, this house believe that you just have to frame out like what are these things, like how does religious education look like? Um, is it like you are only learning about this one religion, or is this like a holistic thing, or are you like learning about religion from a more sociological perspective? So again, religious education can mean a lot of different things. It's up to you to explain and define how does religious education look like in developing countries. Second speeches, I'll just explain very briefly. Second speeches often have two function. The first one is just to back up the first speaker. So these are either things like proving characterization, rebuilding arguments, and playing a more support-based role for the first speaker, especially if you think that the metric that the first speaker are engaging on, or the like things that the first speakers are engaging on, and maybe in terms of like what is the winning metric or the debate metric for you to win the round, are very important and still very contentious. Or if you feel like it's already clearly winning or clearly losing already, you can try to just abandon that particular one and move on and to find alternative pathways of success by either finding new stakeholders, new mechanism, or just new arguments in its entirety. So it kind of functions like a extension speaker in BP somewhat. So it's also just very important for you to just evaluate these kinds of things. Secondly, it's just also important to just evaluate the pendulum in your first exchange. So again, there's a pendulum that swings, right? So make sure you need to evaluate at this particular juncture, do you think your first speaker is winning? If you feel like they're clearly losing or clearly winning, you can instead either focus or redirect it to like another metric for you to either win that one by, or to just win more of that particular metric also. So you can focus instead on developing new arguments. But if you believe that it's contentious, it will also just be strategic to balance it according to the pendulum. So if you believe that they are slightly winning over your opponents, maybe spend less time trying to win on that and try to find other ways for you to be able to burden your opposition or your opponent team by finding alternative pathways of success or finding alternative pathways of victory. If you believe that you're slightly losing, maybe spend a bit more time trying to rebuild back and re-clarify the argument made from your first, and afterwards you're able to just do that strategically and all these things also. So I think that can also work in this instance. But yeah, these are all the things that you're able to do as a second speech, as like a second speaker. I think what second speakers often have to do are to make sure that you listen to first exchange. You don't have to listen to it super attentively, but at least have a general idea of how does it look like and whether or not you are winning or losing by the end of the first exchange. If you feel like you are clearly losing or winning, I think you can focus on other things. But if you feel like it's contentious, then I think you are able to just make sure that you have a solid balance between playing a more support-based role of being more constructive in terms of helping out your first speaker, but you can also do things that are more distinct towards your second speaker role. Either this is in terms of responding to new things or just having an entirely new constructive argument altogether and to win on that particular argument also. So you're able to do these things as well. But yeah, so these are the things that you're able to do. If I was just send this one later also, but these are the things that are just very, very important. So the TLDR is that for framing, it's just very important for you to make it not plausible, but also make it very rich and very in-depth. For second speaker, it's also just to evaluate whether or not you're winning or losing, and to like portion your speech in ways that reflect your strategy in those instances. But yeah, that's all. Good luck for ASDC. And that concludes my lecture. Thank you and see you all.